Katie Mahalic, and today we're talking with Leonard Lee Buschel about his memoir, High from Cannabis to Clarity. Hi, Leonard. Thanks for being here today.
Hello, Katie. It's so great for you to have me here. I'm honored and privileged to be in your company.
I feel the same, and I can't wait to hear more about your story. So let's get to the first question. What inspired you to write High from Cannabis to Clarity?
Actually, a number of years ago, my brother wrote a memoir, was published by Simon and Schuster, and he's always been a bit of a role model for me. So a few years ago, I sort of had an epiphany that maybe it was my turn, and I thought I needed to write something about my overzealous use of drugs and alcohol for many years, and then somehow to end up completely on the other side of that, to do a 180 to where you go from using a little bit of everything every day to using a lot of nothing every day. I had an assistant at the time who could read my handwriting, and I wrote the whole book longhand, and she typed it up, which I think is the way to write because I think it triggers a different part of your brain than sitting at a typewriter or a word processor or a computer. The hand can do things that the brain might keep you from doing as far as getting out the facts.
I feel like I've actually heard there's research that shows it triggers different parts of the brain. So I think that's a really interesting insight.
That the pen is mightier than the sword. I don't think I ever heard anybody say the word processor is mightier than the sword. But obviously, the printing press is the most valuable thing of all. I mean, thank God for Mr. Gutenberg.
This is true. I teach Gutenberg in my journalism 330 class. So that's good to know. I know from learning a little bit about you that your father died when you were a kid, after you were born. And my dad died as a kid. And I know it had a great impact on me and my work. I'm curious, how did the death of your father impact you?
Well, I was 3 weeks old, 21 days old. And I think you can't miss what you've never had. So the issue was more about my mother, who now had a 3-year-old, my brother, a 3-week old, and her husband dies of a heart attack on his way home from work. So she sort of had a little bit of a meltdown. And so she went a little crazy, regained her sanity completely, thank God. But that was the turmoil was with a 3-year-old, a 3-week old, and a brand new house with a mortgage that now she had no husband.
Mhm.
So it was funky to say the least. Growing up without a father, uh, I didn't realize until literally I got familiar with John Bradshaw, the psychologist who wrote a book on shame. And I realized that I had been carrying some shame with me unconsciously for years because I remember being in the schoolyard uh, and having guys stand around and they started talking about their fathers. And I would slink away from the group because I didn't have a father. So that's when it first became apparent to me that I was missing something that everybody else had. When I had my son, when he was 3 weeks old, I thought, if I died now, how much different would his life be? Sort of recreating that moment. It was a big loss. And so when I was a father, after my son was 3 weeks old, I thought, this is all gravy for me. This is all good stuff that I'm still here for him.
So I appreciate you sharing that. Thank you. Um, you were also born with a heart ailment and severe asthma.
Yes.
How early on in your childhood did you recognize that, and how did that shape your childhood?
My first visit to the doctor after I was born, and I don't know whether that's a month later or 2 months later, the doctor told my mother, your son's heart sounds irregular. And it was what they called aortic stenosis, that one valve was a little smaller than the rest, so it had to work extra hard. So it 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 cost me or enabled me to never have to go to gym class, which I regret because that's where you sort of luckily, I played a lot of sports. I played sports on the street every day, but I was never allowed to go take gym. And the other interesting part was I had asthma, and that was more of an issue because I don't, when you have a bad heart, you don't know you have a bad heart until it fails. But the asthma would keep me from being able to walk steps. And I remember in middle school having an elevator pass, but I would never let anybody see me get on the elevator because it would mean I had some sort of defect or weakness. So I would wait until everyone was in class and then I'd take the elevator. So the asthma I had more issues with the asthma than I did my heart condition, which eventually got fixed.
Now, you grew up in the Logan neighborhood of North Philadelphia, and obviously it had an impact because the book is published as a collaboration between Henry Gray Publishing and your own publishing company, Logan House.
Yes.
You write about it in a way that makes it sound like a flashback in a Scorsese film, full of shady characters who are nonetheless father figures for you. Tell us about growing up in that neighborhood and how it influenced you.
I called it was like one of the last Jewish ghettos in Philadelphia. Means like every third person was buying challah on Fridays. Okay. Uh, I think of it as Brigadoon or the Mists of Avalon because it doesn't exist anymore. It's not there. The whole neighborhood was built on a creek back in the late 40s. And eventually the whole neighborhood sunk after I got out. But the memories are very, very vivid. Our neighbors never got divorced. They never moved. There was no violence that was visible, no alcoholism as I could see. We went to the Phillies games, we went to the Eagles games occasionally, and I loved it because it was safe. It was safe. My family never had an automobile, so I had to walk and take the bus and take the subway everywhere until I had my own car when I was 16. Uh, and it felt like a village. It felt like a village. Yes, a lot of gamblers, small time thieves, no mobsters, nothing that serious. We were a lot of gambling, and I think I got addicted to gambling to fit in. And maybe it was also part of my nature to be a compulsive gambler at an earlier age. Like I say, my first addictions were really sugar, television, and gambling. And those were the three things that are the best escapes. And sugar, as you know, is the cheapest antidepressant there is.
Yes, and the most available, easily available, right? Um,
Yes.
I appreciate that. It brings me to my next question. You've said that you view your life in terms of movies, and your book is filled with references not only about movies, but also, rock music, poetry, all the arts.
Hmm.
Where does that deep love of popular entertainment come from? Was it an escape? Did it go deeper than an escape? What is that about?
Well, in my neighborhood, we were under the illusion that when we were going downtown to a movie theater, that if we got pulled over by the cops and they said you were speeding, we could say we didn't want to miss the first scene and they would let us go. That's how much we respected films. Like you can't miss. If you're 1 minute late, you can't go in. You have to leave. Uh, so I was taught respect for that genre. It's like it's a great escape. It's really an hour and a half or more if you're lucky, where you're not thinking about yourself or
That's
your problems or your anything. It's I think it's the greatest art there is because it combines music and set design, and art director, and costumes, and of course acting and storytelling.
I have a brother that has asthma, and I know it sounds like you had a lot of close calls as a child dealing with asthma until you were finally given an inhaler. So
Yes.
Yeah, tell me how the inhaler changed your life.
It's called Ventolin. I don't know what it was called at the time. I played a lot of street sports, and if I started to have an asthma attack, I would have to go home. And one time I went and my mother called the doctor because I couldn't catch my breath. He came over, handed me the first inhaler. I took a whiff, and within a minute, I was back out on the street playing. So it enabled me not to have to stop what I was doing in order to have an asthma attack, because the medication at that time would take an hour or two to work, whereas the inhaler was instantaneously. So my addiction to what's that called?
Then gratification.
Instant gratification. There you go. You knew that word,
Yeah.
gratification. God, I'm gonna have to memorize that one.
So, it obviously was a new medicine that you had suddenly had the
Yeah.
opportunity to try.
uh Yes, and it was in my pocket for 20 years.
Wow. Okay. Do you still carry one?
No, luckily. Uh, I was introduced to a new medication 10 years ago, and it's one inhalation in the morning, and then I don't have asthma at all. I could go off for the whole day and not even think about taking an inhaler with me. 20 years ago, that would have been impossible. I had to have one everywhere all the time. When it was empty or I lost it, I'd end up at the hospital. And I did have that one very big asthma attack when I was in Los Angeles and I was up all night snorting cocaine and drinking Heineken. And at 6 in the morning, uh, trying to go to sleep, I suddenly couldn't breathe at all. And I literally fell against my roommate's door. Luckily, he hadn't taken enough Valiums to be asleep yet. So he was awake. He saw me. I was blue. I don't remember what happened after that, but I remember 3 days later being conscious and thinking I was blind, uh, because I was in a hospital and they had taped my eyelids shut because I was so drugged that my eyes wouldn't shut. So they have to tape them shut so they don't get too dry and have them, crack. And I woke up, I thought, I'm blind. And then the next thing I heard was my mother's voice. My mother lived in Philadelphia. I was in Los Angeles. I thought maybe I did die. And then they took the tape off and I saw my mother was there. And at which time she said, I'm so glad you're alive. The doctors called me 3 days ago and said I better be on the next flight to LA because there's a 50-50 chance you're going to be flying home with your son's body. And she flew from Philly alone. I can't imagine the horror and the trauma that she had on that flight. And the doctors, when they came into the room later, they said, you're lucky it was 6 o'clock in the morning. If it had been 7 o'clock in the morning, there would have been enough traffic. You would have died in the ambulance. But luckily, it was early in the morning. We could get you here because you were gone. They ventilated, the intubated, ventilated, whatever, just to keep my lungs functioning. I'm glad I don't think I experienced too much brain damage with losing oxygen to my mind. Who knows? Maybe I'm a little bit off because of that, but I still was able to write a book.
Did that moment change your life at that point?
It did in the most unusual way. I stopped drinking vodka and I started drinking Bombay gin. That
What?
was the adjustment I made. Why? Because I the idea of living without drugs never even occurred to me. You can't have a much worse consequence than almost dying, but the thought never crossed my mind. I think it took me 5 years after that to finally drive to a rehab. And I only did that because I thought the cops were about to arrest me and I thought it would look good if I was in a rehab.
I'm I'm sorry to laugh, but you have this sense of go to rehab, avoid the cops, drive fast to the movies, avoid the tickets. This is very You have very interesting
Well,
decision.
my motto in life is do everything you want to and just don't get caught. And that's the motto. And that's why I'm considered an incredibly successful drug dealer, because I never made a lot of money, but I never got caught. And I think and trust me, 7 years after getting sober, I celebrated because I knew the statute of limitations was up and they couldn't arrest me for the crimes I had committed for the 23 years I was a drug dealer.
Mhm.
And it just, like I said, I never made a lot of money, but I made enough to live and have
Mhm.
a child and have feminine influences in my life. And go to movies and go traveling and go to Japan for a few weeks and go to Europe every couple of years and go to Jamaica once in a while. Uh, and that's all I ever really wanted. I don't think I was as much an addict as I was a hedonist. I liked pleasure. I liked feeling good. And I don't think that's unusual.
Was it difficult for you to write so openly about the experiences that so many people often want to keep quiet?
No, I love doing it. Why not?
Okay.
My hero is Henry Miller. He was one of my adopted literary fathers, and Martin Amis, and so many other great people who wrote openly because there's nothing to be ashamed of.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so in regards to it's interesting, you talk about addiction to marijuana. Can you tell us about the first time you tried it and that moment when you decided, was there like a moment that you were sure this was going to be part of your daily life, or did it just kind of creep in?
No, there was a moment that I'll never forget. I happened to be tripping on LSD at the time, and I thought, this feels really good, but it's really unreasonable to think I could do LSD every day, but I can do marijuana every day. I can get high every day and at least get close to this feeling. Luckily, it wasn't a bad trip, and the weed I had and the hashish I was addicted to always worked. It always worked. Uh, it worked so well that when I was 20 years old, there was no hashish in Philadelphia. And marijuana wasn't that big at that time, but and it wasn't any in Philadelphia. And I was in college at the time, and my friend Joe and we were smoking a lot of what they call red Lebanese hash at the time. And we looked on a map and we saw Lebanon was right north of Israel. And we thought, somebody must be bringing it to Israel. We're Jewish. We should go there. And so we got our plane tickets, and our family thought we were going to discover our roots. Our friends thought we were going to make money because we were going to smuggle back hashish, but actually we were only going to get our stash. We were only going to get our stash, even though coming back through Kennedy Airport with the hashish we had at that time could have been 10 years in prison. There was no other alternative because we couldn't get any. Uh, so we went and got it, and I was very happy about it. Uh, the following year, I went back to do it again, a little differently. I had hired someone to bring it back, but I was the escort, so to speak. And I look back on those days and I'm thinking, how crazy must I have been? Uh, how reckless. Oh, a risk taker or just an idiot? Or just so in love with this substance that 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 was almost better than any relationship I had. It was very dependable. Every time I put a little hashish in a pipe, it gave me that feeling of joy and happiness and superiority. And it made me smarter and it made me more friendly. It really worked very well for me. I smoked a joint on my way to rehab.
Wow.
Okay. And I
Yeah.
had another joint for the ride home because I wasn't going there to quit using and drinking. I was going there because I had become addicted to ecstasy. And that was a drug. That was the only drug I couldn't control. I could always control drinking. I could always control cocaine, but I couldn't control ecstasy. So when I drove there, I had a joint on the way I was high as a kite when I got there. And I thought, oh, this is just another interesting place marijuana is taking me. And luckily, in AA, they call it struck sober. In fact, the second day I was there, I called my brother. They let me use the phone once a day. Tell him, hey, I can't stay here. They have these things called the 12 steps engraved in the wall. And I thought, and there's God on every other line. And I said, I'm not staying here. And he said, give it a couple days. You've been to Tokyo, you've been to Zendo's, you were at the Wailing Wall, sticking a little prayer in there. You know Ram Dass, you've read his book, you've met Alan Watts, give it a shot. And so I did. And the next day, as I was walking out of the main building, all desire for drugs left me. It was, I call it a miracle, because up until then, for 26 years, every day I got high, and suddenly I knew I would never get high again. And I can't say I'm a spiritual person, but I know that at that moment, I was relieved of a 26-year addiction that I never saw ending. And I had that experience. And of course, I was then prepared for nothing in my life, because I had spent 26 years using drugs, 23 years dealing drugs, which meant my Rolodex wasn't good for nothing anymore. It was like, oh, what am I going to do now? And then little by little, and I obviously did become a drug counselor for a number of years, and I started a sobriety recovery film festival for 15 years, and the addiction recovery newsletter, e-bulletin that I've been publishing for 11 and a half years, culminating with this.
What would you like readers to take away from this book?
Well, if they pay cash, I would like them to take away their change. And I would also like them to get a few laughs. It is very funny. There are some very humorous places in the book. I ultimately, if they're still smoking pot after 20 years, I would like them to at least think about quitting. It's like I say, if you've been smoking pot for more than 20 years, you're not doing it to get high anymore. You're just doing it because it's a habit. You just can't imagine what life is like without it, and what life is like without it is so frigging intense, you can't handle it. So you need a filter, you need a buffer, you need a cloud of smoke protecting you from reality, which is incredibly beautiful and scary. And you got to be able to roll with the punches. And that's better without any substances whatsoever. It's like my dear friend, and I never knew, I met him once, but Timothy Leary said, the point is not to get high, the point is to be high. And so I'll never come down.
In closing, do you have any advice for anyone that might want to say goodbye to their habit?
Get some help. There are people that can help with that. Make a decision, take a stand, and then stand there. Do a pro and con list. What are the pros of continuing? What are the pros of ending? And you might not even know what the pros of ending are, because they're mystical. They're mystical. You can never be a hypocrite if you're not using drugs or drinking.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank
Thank
you.
you.
You're the best.
Thank you. Thank you for talking with me. Thank you for speaking with us today. Look for Leonard Lee Buschel's new book, High from Cannabis to Clarity, at HenryGrayPublishing.com, or ask for it at your favorite neighborhood bookstore. Until then, happy reading, everyone.